Hey guys, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about the Snyder Cut, which has been announced and it will be released on HBO Max in 2021. And there are some interesting additional details about that I'll get into in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to discuss kind of the overview as a whole. So in case you've been living under a rock and have no idea what the Snyder Cut movement is, which if you're in any way involved in the DC community, you know what it is. Basically, back in 2017, Zack Snyder was originally attached to be the director of Justice League, got like halfway through filming it. We don't know exactly how much of it he filmed, how much wasn't quite finished. Warner Brothers was kind of having issues with wanting to keep Zack Snyder on as director to begin with, because, you look at Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, and the critical response just was not good. It was becoming kind of a joke almost that DC movies were just bad and inferior to Marvel. And as a studio where you're holding characters like Superman and Batman, you can argue that Snyder should be allowed to show his creative vision. With that said, he does not own these characters. So Warner Brothers has every right to say, we're letting you go as the director. Now, they didn't do that. But what ended up happening was Zack Snyder's daughter, unfortunately, took her own life during the making of Justice League, so he stepped down, and Joss Whedon was put in his place as director. Now, I don't think Joss really was the right person to make Justice League. There was some evidence after the film came out that he was actually supporting people joking about the movie, and I don't think he took it all that seriously. I don't think it's fair to say that he didn't give it any effort, but with that said, it kind of felt like he just came in and tried to do damage control and tried to Marvelize it, if that makes sense. Like, he tried to make it feel like a Marvel film where it's really safe and brightly saturated, and it did not feel like what Zack Snyder was going to do. Now, the Snyder Cut has been a movement that people on Twitter and just everywhere else in the DC community have been pushing for Zack Snyder to be allowed to release his cut of the film. The problem, and what we're learning from the details being announced today, is that this cut was not finished. Now, Zack Snyder and Jason Momoa really fed the fire by saying it was a completed cut, that there was a director's cut for Justice League that Warner Brothers weren't releasing. Ultimately, the cut was not finished. There's still additional scenes that are going to be shot, VFX that need to be finished, and ultimately, I do struggle a bit, because I'm excited to see what Zack Snyder wanted to do with Justice League. With that said, I can't say that I don't have an issue with validating some of the toxicity. I mean, there were people, like when Zack Snyder would go to a suicide prevention conference to speak or something, I mean, there's people in the comments like, hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Like, that's totally inappropriate and just unacceptable behavior. Spamming Warner Brothers executives seems kind of inappropriate as well. And ultimately, I enjoy Zack Snyder's films. Like, I liked BVS, I liked Man of Steel, but I don't know that they were the best picks to put in the mainstream. I don't think that they're a great representation of Batman or Superman. I do not think Zack Snyder understands Batman at all. And I know that there's going to be, people in the comments disagreeing and thinking that Snyder basically invented Batman, but ultimately, Snyder has a very clear vision for what he wants with these characters, but he ultimately doesn't really understand them. Like, he says that he has this, 7-film arc that he had planned with all of them, and you hear some of his original ideas, and it just doesn't feel true to the characters. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not an interesting story, but I think that the reason that the BVS in particular was so unaccepted by fans and critics was because it's sort of like telling a story but trying to tell us it's something else. Like, you're telling us an original story that actually has some pretty interesting ideas, but you're trying to tell us it's a story about Batman and Superman, and it doesn't feel like a Batman and Superman story. And so ultimately it comes off feeling disingenuous and not really like a good reflection of those characters. Like, someone like me who's been a Batman fan for life, it's so frustrating to see a Batman that's like calling in airstrikes on thugs and just killing people left and right. And you can say that he killed in the other movies too. I'm not going to get into that right now. That's a subject for a different time. But I'd even agree that there hasn't been an accurate adaptation of Batman yet. This is something that I agree with, like, Salvage and Slickmoff on. I don't think that we have had a film that accurately shows what Batman in the comics is like. We haven't had a mainstream look at Batman that really is accurate. But, you know, the difference between someone like Christian Bale's Batman is that he was, like, actively trying not to kill people, and he had this whole code of not using guns and not killing as much as he possibly could. And it felt like that was a theme of the films, was not killing. And it felt kind of like when he did kill people, it was more of the consequences of just telling a Batman story in, like, this hyper-realistic world than Batman actively trying to kill people. In Batman vs. Superman, it felt very deliberate, and, you know, you can make the argument like, oh, well, it was because Jason Todd died, or Dick Grayson. It was Dick Grayson who Snyder wanted to kill off. You know, it was because Dick Grayson died. He was so sad about that. And it's like, yeah, but there was no exposition to show us that. You know, if you're a mainstream fan and don't know who Dick Grayson is, that means nothing to you. So, I know that was a really long tangent. Ultimately, what I'm saying is that I understand why Warner Brothers isn't still going in this in the direction that Snyder wanted for the DCEU. I don't understand why they put him in charge of that in the first place, if I'm being honest. I don't know why you wouldn't get someone like even if you got a really good comics writer, like if you got Paul Dini, who worked on the animated series, and you got him, and you got, like, Jeff Johns and people who are really knowledgeable about these characters, and have them sit down and sort of map out an idea for the DCEU. You know, I don't understand why you'd give someone who doesn't really understand the character's full power over this whole cinematic universe, but, you know, I digress. The point is that this is coming out, and I'm excited to see it. I think it's an interesting Elseworlds look at these characters, and ultimately I think HBO is the right place for it. My concern is that this community has gotten so worked up and so toxic that this film, I think, should be the conclusion of the trilogy of Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League. I don't think it should be the original intention, which was to tease the rest of the DCEU. They were going to have Darkseid, like, cameo for a second. They were going to have, like, you know, a bunch of hints toward, like, a Justice League Part 2, and then, like, probably the solo Batman movie, and maybe a Man of Steel 2. I don't think that they should do that unless they are willing to, you know, do some kind of mini-series on HBO for it. I don't think that it would be smart to have two consecutive universes running in theaters at the same time. But if you said, you know, here's an Elseworlds DC story playing on HBO, I'd be all for it. And I actually really would like to see a continuation of this. I would like to see some of these more large, big-scale action fights, because that's what Snyder's really good at. And I do think that the films have quality, like there's quality in the film. I wouldn't say it's necessarily in the writing, but I do enjoy it. So I wouldn't be against at all seeing what Zack Snyder wanted to do with this universe. But like I said, I don't think that it's quite right for the mainstream. I don't think you should, like, replace Matt Reeves and, David F. Sandberg, I think his name is, who does Shazam. Like, still let those guys do their own thing, because I think that will reflect the mainstream much better. But I think Snyder got his shot in theatrical releases. I don't know that that's where this version of the DC characters belong. But I do think that it would be interesting to see either on HBO, or to just see this as a big, nice finale for fans of this version of the DC characters. So thanks you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments below what you guys think about the Snyder Cut, about possibly seeing a continuation on HBO. Yeah, thanks you guys so much for watching again, and we'll see you guys in the next one.